copies for like 15, so it's very, very cheap for like a lot of stories, more than 20 creators. There's like a lot of work into this, and we're gonna get into the phases of creating this project, the stories that it showcases, how it treats bisexuality, and we'll also talk a little bit with Kat about her story on it. And yeah, that would cover it. So first of all, welcome. Thank you so much for coming to chat with me. I'm really, really excited to do this, especially today.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah, it's Bi Visibility Day, so it's such a great time to do the show, and I'm always excited to talk about this comic book.
Yay. So first of all, how did the project like appear? How you have the idea? How do you get to like, I'm gonna reach out to people? How was the process? So other people that maybe have similar ideas know a little bit about it.
Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, this took less than a year. I think I had the idea around March, and well, I've had this idea for a while, but it was always just in my head. I'm like, oh, one day I'll do it. And I was talking to a friend who's my co-writer for a lot of things, Slice of Life, our queer webtoon, and we just did a crossover between our two books, Haunting and Like Fall Like Daughter, and he's one of my best friends. So I was having a conversation with him, and we were just having our weekly writing session. I was like, yeah, I've been like throwing this idea around of doing a bisexual anthology. And but I'm like, oh, I'll wait for it. And at the time, like I've been out for a long time, but I wasn't really out to the internet. So not that I felt like I had to do that, but I've been doing comic reviews for a very long time. So at that point, I was like, also I kind of like have to come out to the internet if I do this. So yeah, it was just an idea I had. And he's like, why aren't you doing it? This sounds awesome. Like, what's stopping you? And I was like, yeah, no, you're right. And I talked to a couple other friends. We do like a comic book happy hour every month where, indie creators, we just talk together and we just, throw ideas and, whatever. We just talk to each other about comics. And then I threw this idea at them. I was like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do it right now, but we'll see. Like, I need to figure out the process and all that. And they're like, why are you not doing this right now? This would be great. I think this would do great on Kickstarter. So I was like, yeah, why am I not doing this? So I posted a call for action of creators, writers, and artists to, publish their stories and give me their ideas to potentially be in this anthology. And something I did different that a lot of anthologies, I've seen not do through Kickstarter. A, everyone's been paid, so including the writers, which is something that was really important to me. So that's A. B, when they submitted the list of writers, they had to give a full script, and I think that's why this story and this book went so smoothly, is because most of it was kind of already done from the writing perspective. We really just need to edit it. So that was easier for me as an editor. Is just like, okay, I can see where this is going. We could fine tune it instead of just like, here's a log line, and then when you write it, maybe you'd be late or whatever. So this was just the best way to show for people who are most dedicated to want to be in this anthology. So that's something we did different as well. Another thing we did different is that I asked people who are a writer, they could just send the script and they did not need an artist. And vice versa, an artist could just send their portfolio and they didn't need a writer, or they could team up. So if you're a newer writer or an artist and you guys want to be together, that's something I also added. I really try to make the process as easy as possible on both sides, and as comfortable as possible on both sides. But yeah, that was kind of the process. And then after that, we took a weekend to choose the stories we wanted, and we chose them. And we have 9 wonderful stories. I wish we could have added even more. And yeah, so that's kind of how things went. And things went really smoothly after that. And then we made the book. We actually had the book done before the Kickstarter was launched, which is crazy because we started in March. So it didn't take that long to finish.
Yeah, and another thing I really like a lot, and I think it goes with what you say of making the process like oriented towards independent creators and showing their work, is that in the Kickstarter, you actually have an indie comics bundle with a bunch of comics that people, when they support it, they get those comics. I imagine it's also by bisexual or queer creators. And that's something great because you kind of discover other artists or have like these connections. And I imagine that's also on purpose. That's like trying to like make kind of a net of different people that do this creative work.
Yeah, for sure. I
Mm,
mean, I do an indie bundle every campaign. Just
uh-huh.
obviously for this one, I wanted to do a queer one. You're correct. It's queer creators or queer stories that are included in this one, and yeah, hopefully people could discover their new favorite queer book through it, or just people could only give $1. I'm giving you guys like 17 books, so you're getting a lot of bang for your buck for supporting.
And also, we'll get more into each story as we go through kind of the content of the book. But how was the process of editing? Because you're talking about the process of like getting these creators, getting these stories. But how was when you decided which stories happen to appear in the anthology? Do they have further edits? Did you have to add anything? Give feedback to the writers or artists?
Yeah, for sure. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, one thing was definitely to, again, fine tune, but as an editor, you don't want to put your voice into it. It's not my story.
Uh-huh.
So, what I really tried doing is notes that would just help the story be elevated. And really, I think the most we had was 3 passes, like for stories. All because we had the script and because they were accepted in the first place, they were already at a level where it's like, oh, this is good for the anthology. So that really worked out in our favor. Again, I think if we just had the log line, it would have taken a little longer to do so, and maybe again things could have been late or whatever. This just showed how many people were being dedicated. But yeah, the honestly the editing process was really easy because everyone was really easy to work with and everyone met their deadlines. And I never felt like, oh my God, we're not going to meet this deadline. That's why again the book was done so early, and yeah, everyone did what they needed to do. And on my side, uh, it was relatively easy, and I had an assistant editor, which was that friend I was talking about, who is my co-writer for a lot of things, and that helped too to get kind of two eyes on something that maybe might have missed. And yeah, there wasn't too much on my side, luckily, just because of who the creators were and how even the artists and creators worked together. It was really smooth sailing.
Also, there's two things about this anthology that really, really caught my attention really fast. One is like the art. The art of the anthology feels very cohesive, and like you pick up artists that have like a certain style, and it feels maybe because it also flows so well, flows from one story to another. You choose a way of putting them together that it really feels like, like a book. It doesn't feel like a collection. It feels like a collection, but also like you can read it pretty smoothly. And I wonder if that's also part of the process of we're trying to make the reader like get into cozy into the book or something like that.
Yeah, that was something maybe was one of the harder parts is like how do you organize this, right? To make it all flow. And there were some art styles were different, right? You had LGBTQ RPG, which is kind of like this more cartoonier indie style of art. And then you have, my story, Will I Regret It, which is almost like Pixar art, like almost like Disney art. So that was interesting to see there were so many different styles here. But I really took a lot of time to see how things would flow. We're like, okay, this is a dramatic story, so the next one maybe should be a little comedic. So we really just want to organize it in that way, so everyone's getting like different genres. Like you're not having four slice of life stories back to back. We really took our time to be like, okay, this is where the story should be, because the flow was so important to us. And like you said, I really wanted this to be a book. It's so funny. I made an anthology, but as a consumer, I normally don't read anthologies as often. Like they're not my favorite thing to read because of the aspect of like, okay, this just feels like short stories all put together. Maybe I liked one or two, but because By Visibility had a theme, which is bisexuality, but then also again the flow of it, I think just really works. And a lot of people have said like, oh, this is a rare anthology where I feel like I was able to read it backward, from front to back, and just feel like it was smooth sailing. And that was something I really wanted to do here, is just to showcase it above and beyond any other anthology that I personally have read, or haven't why I hadn't been able to get in those anthologies. How can I make it better for this one? And that's something I really obviously found appreciation for short stories and appreciations for this medium. And I appreciate everything that people do with anthologies, and it really opened my eyes on that, and why short stories are important as well.
The other thing that really caught my attention, especially after doing various reads of the whole thing, is that most of these stories, and I wonder if this is also something intentional in the selection process, most of them deal with bisexuality pretty centrally. They have something explicit to tell you about it, they have something to express, and it's not just a bisexual character existing in a story for most of them. Probably there's two that could be more in the iWiz, and the RPG could be more of a bisexual character existing in a story, but the rest of them, all of them are pretty clearly about telling a message to the reader about how certain things are different to manage, about how certain things can be joyful, certain things can be difficult, and they are pretty much like speaking to the experience. And I wonder if that's intentional, because like you can take different routes when you decide to do an anthology about bisexuality. And certainly, I feel like here's is a route of we're trying to talk about the topic, not only to like put characters that are casually bisexual. You get me?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if it was intentional, but I'm glad it happened that way. When we gave the call for action, it was just like, make any story about bisexuality, like just do what you need to do. And that's why we did get stories like LGBTQ RPG or I Wish, because those were kind of just stories of like, these are bisexual characters like figuring out life, but it doesn't quite have to do with their, well, I think both have to do with their bisexuality, but not as explicitly as the other ones. But yeah, it wasn't explicit, but it's something that was important, and something that after reading volume one, or grading volume one, I was like, man, there's so much more to say. There's so much conversations about bisexuality that I couldn't even scratch the surface here. There's just, I'm already
Yes.
coming up with ideas for like, oh, what would I write for a volume two? What would I want to see with a volume two? So yeah, this doesn't scratch the surface, and it just shows why we need this representation. And I think a lot of media bisexuality is not really discussed. Still
Yes.
to this day, like I've been doing a lot of interviews, and people are like, "Oh, what's the best bisexual stories you've read or watched or whatever?" And I'm like, "Man, that's hard." And I hate to say that because I'm like, I'm sure there are bisexual stories out there, but there's not a lot. Like I was, saying, "Oh, Sex Education is good. Jane the Virgin's good," and then I was thinking of comics. I'm like, "Oh." Julie Power is really good, but she doesn't really talk about her bisexuality that much. Nico is a wonderful character. I love her, but she really doesn't talk about her bisexuality that much. And honestly, like growing up, and that was the whole point of why I made this anthology, is that I did not have that representation. Like I don't think I ever saw a bisexual character anywhere. Like obviously what bisexual means, like the definition of it, but you don't really know what it looks like. And I remember like me coming out, it was like YouTube videos, like feeling, seeing real experiences of like just following like YouTubers and being like, oh, that's what bisexuality is. Cool. And just hearing other bisexual talk, but it's never been like in media for me. And that's something I really wanted to change, and something I, done in my other stories as well, and continuing to do that. So yeah, haven't scratched the surface. There's so much more to say for sure. This is just the beginning.
So we already got some comments by Gabriel, the friend I was talking to you about earlier, and
Oh, awesome.
and he's excited about Volume Two. We'll put a pin on that. We'll talk about that later. But he asked about the first story, your story. Will I ever? If I'm not wrong, that's the where I regret it. That's the title, and he says the first story was so heart punching, like it's really like.
Mhm.
And why did you choose to start there? We can talk about the writing later, but that's the choice for now.
I mean, I hate to be a little selfish, but it was my story, so I was like, "Oh, why not put it in the beginning?" um, but yeah. Other than that, like story-wise, I just wanted to tell a really dramatic slice of life. It was also one of the longer ones. So I wanted to start out with like a 10-pager and then go to the shorter ones. And then, if you notice, the longer chapters are the cat or the beginning and the cap. So the beginning is Will I Regret It, and then the end is By Card, which is one of the longer stories as well, which is 6 pages, but very different from Will I Regret It. So yes, it was intentional as well. That it's just like, let's tell this like kind of longer form story that's also kind of slow, and not in a bad way, but the pacing is like, really takes its time. So I think if you add that in the middle of a book, it's like, oh, it kind of slowed down. I think starting there helped because you have a lot of punchier stories in the middle there that kind of go a little quicker. So yeah, it definitely was intentional to kind of start with a longer story. I don't know if I was really thinking about like, oh, this is sad, but just kind of ended up being there.
This is gonna make people sad. Great.
Let's start there.
Okay, so now that we open the box, let's talk about your story first, and we can talk about some of the other ones. And I really really like it. I'm not out with my grandfathers or grandmothers in general, so it really drove a lot of feelings. Like it really, and I think for some other people too, like for Gabriel, I know, and I know this is gonna get feelings across. And I wonder if there's how did you manage to like put it so well in the sense that you kind of put this thing of like the mother convincing her of not, of like not coming out or not necessary. If there's a lot of discussion there that's really interesting, and I just wonder why, what is inspiration. If it's just personal experience, that's totally valid, but I wonder if there's also some like rhetoric of I'm trying to show people how they can help others by showing someone that is not helping. I don't know if you
Yeah.
get me.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to really tell a real story. And I think with this story, I jam packed a lot of information, like you said. That's kind of what I tend to do with my writing. And a feedback I've gotten in a good way, like positive feedback, is like I'm able to tell a lot in a small amount of pages. So without being expositionary. And yeah, there's a lot of themes here. Honestly, the story is about mother and daughter. Like you think it's gonna be a story about the grandma. The grandma's at the end. It is about her, but it's really not. It's about, how the mom comes from a different generation and says, yeah, I'm cool with you being bi, but I don't want people to really know about it. And I don't think
But
but right. And what's interesting is because I think some people could actually not see her as the villain, because I do think she does some valid things in some regard, because in the end, she's like, I don't want you to regret if she has a bad reaction. Like I don't want you to regret it if like one day she's cool with it and the next day she's not because she has dementia. So that was kind of like, oh, okay, like I kind of get where she's coming from. But then the other side, it's like, yeah, but you're also just not like proud of being. You're saying like, oh, only if I marry a girl, because it needs to be visually seen that like I'm bi. Like it can't just be that's my identity. So there's these really interesting conversations here. And then also like I feel like I love coming out stories. Like I just really enjoy it. I know like, oh, we're tired of the coming out story. But I'm like, yes, I'm tired of like straight people telling the coming out story, because that's mostly
yes,
what we have on television. Like I'm tired of it being drama, but I'm not tired of telling real stories, because this is a real thing that still happens. And I wanted to tell that coming out's not just like, oh, you have to come out to your parents. Like you have to come out to so many different people, and it looks different. And it looks different if you're bisexual compared to if you're gay, or if you're any other member of the LGBTQ community. Every coming out story is different depending on your identity and your experiences. So I really wanted to tell that. And I think a lot of people don't talk about like your extended family. Like one day you're going to have to, come to your family dinner and everyone's going to know that you're bi, or you want to tell your grandparents or whatever, and what that
yes,
looks like because they're from such a different generation. Um, and this did come from a personal story. Not all the stuff here was my story. Obviously you have to make it a little bit more dramatic, but I've dealt with grandparents with dementia, and I have a person that's really close to me that is older and comes from a different generation. And at that point, I hadn't told them that I was bi, but interestingly enough, during this campaign, I did. And it just like, so it's that question. Like when I wrote this, I really didn't know what the results were going to be, because I was kind of thinking, like, in the mother's point of view, is like, is it really worth it? Like, will they understand? And then I was like, F it. Let me just do this, because will I regret it? And I had like a long conversation with this person, and they loved me and understood and says, oh yeah, I knew. So, you never know what the reaction is going to be. In that long run, it was a really happy reaction. It was just kind of weird and surreal and humbling that it all kind of happened while I was doing this Kickstarter, because I was talking about comics. It's like, yeah, making this comic, blah, blah, blah. And then it just kind of came up, and it wasn't even planned. It was just like kind of something that happened. I was like, oh, cool. All right. I'm not the main character of that story. That's good. So yeah, it comes from personal experience, but also, not, I think I definitely just wanted to tell some certain ideas in this story. And that's kind of what came through that mother character. then maybe, thoughts that go through your own head too with own internalized biphobia, and kind of want to explore that as well. So yeah, there's a lot that I try to compact here, which is kind of cool. But I'm so proud of that story. I think it's one of the best stories I've written, and it is actually one of the quickest I wrote because it came from such a, personal spot. I wrote it once. I was like, okay, this is the first draft. We'll see what happens. I said to a couple of friends, they're like, oh, this is perfect. I'm like, really? Like, you don't think I should pass it all? Because obviously writing, you have to sometimes do a lot of passes. But you don't think I should do another pass? Like, no, this is great. It's raw. Just keep it here. I'm like,
Hmm.
okay. And I kept it there, and I really hadn't changed it from the first draft, which is such a rarity. But I really think it's a stronger story because of it, because there's so many raw emotions there that wasn't
Yes.
like, fixed because of different drafts. So I'm super proud of this story.
Yeah, I can see why the first draft and the draftness of it is part of how the story like punches so hard. But yeah. Thank you for telling me all of that because that helps. The good experience also helps.
No, of course. Yeah. No, I want to be as transparent as possible because I think that's what this story is all about,
Hmm.
what this book's all about, is that hopefully my experiences or someone else's experience can help somebody else that didn't have that representation. So, I'm, very grateful I could share that story, and there was a positive end to that story.
That's amazing. We got another comment from Kyle, and he's very interested in Jimmy Gaspero's RPG story, we talked about that earlier a little bit, especially as he writes something like nerddom has been intended to be inclusive. So like this thing about like this story having an RPG setting in which there are LGBT characters and etc. and then real people expressing themselves through that. So that's kind of the comment.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that story, honestly, when I read that, it was one of my favorites. It was just like, oh man. First of all, like I really wanted more male voices. Like I wanted
Hmm.
more men to write, but also like I wanted more male characters, and that's something in a volume two I really like. You know, a lot of it just had to do with the submissions we got, and like what was the best stories. But that, stuff I really wanted to do, and I sadly we just didn't have those stories. They literally just weren't submitted. I want more male characters because I think there's such a different story to tell with bisexuality and masculinity, and toxic masculinity, and I think men have a harder time coming out as bi. And I would love to tell those stories. Well, not me personally, but hopefully somebody who has experienced that. I wanted to tell more trans stories. I wanted to tell more non-binary stories, but sadly we didn't get them. But I'm hoping now that volume one has done so well, we'll get more submissions for volume two, and
Yes.
we'll get to have more voices. That's really what's important to me, and more experiences.
Yeah. I did notice, and I'm not gonna lie, I did notice that the stories were told from a very cis
Mm-hmm.
perspective, and that sometimes drove me a little bit off. But I think if you, as you said, if volume two has broader experiences, these are very few stories. These are like, as you told, 9 stories are not a lot of stories in which you can tell a lot of nuances. So it's great that you have like some baseline and then you expand from there. And yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, that's something I definitely wanted, and honestly, I appreciate that critique because it's something that I had as my own critique, because it's like I really wanted this. Like going into it, I was like, wanted
Hmm.
trans voices, I wanted non-binary voices. Luckily, we did have a couple of non-binary creators, which was
Yes.
really nice, like a couple of artists. But I definitely wanted more of that from a story perspective, and if we don't get it
Yeah.
from the initial um pitching, initial call for action for the next volume, I think I'll just actually like go up to people now, because before I didn't have a volume one. So now I have a volume one and be like, look, we did this already. You want to be
We
part of
can do
this.
it.
So
Yes.
exactly. So it's a little easier to actually like go up to people and say, do you want to be part of this? It's been proven that we've done this, and obviously you'll be paid and all of that. So yeah, I think it'll be a little easier to do that if we don't get the submissions. Hopefully we do, and we get a lot of
Yeah.
wonderful trans and non-binary submissions as well. So and also again, male submissions, and I just want people of color. Like I just want to expand all the voices I can with this next volume, and obviously good stories and all that as well. So just so excited about that.
So I'm thinking of some of the other stories that we can talk a little bit also. Mm, Oh, I'm just gonna like pick favorites now because I don't wanna ask you to pick favorites because that seems cruel. And
They're all my
so
babies.
yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna pick favorites, and if you have something else to tell about any story that I haven't, please like pick up later and say, "Hey, Duna, this is important."
Yeah, of course.
But I really, really, really like it. My voice. I think it was like my probably my personal favorite also because I think it speaks to it's very fictional because it's for people that are watching. It's about I'm not gonna spoil the story, but it's about half mutate, half human people or something like that, and it's clearly like a metaphor. But there's some explicit stuff also there. And one thing that I think is great is that it speaks through a reality, to a historical reality of bisexual people, especially in the 80s and the 90s. Uh, some of them maybe not out, but fighting for fellow LGBTQ people, especially in the AIDS crisis. It really called to a lot of that for me, and to how some people have to decide how they involve themselves in something that touches them deeply. How do
Yeah,
they want to do their activism? And that's something that all LGBT people do, not only bisexual people. But it's really, really interesting that it goes to that role that I feel sometimes is forgotten of like, yeah, sadly, bisexual activists in the 80s and 90s, especially when when we as a community had some of the roughest years. And some of the people that were doing the most and were classified as allies were not allies. Were part of the community but trying to help in other ways. Lawyers and there's some historical figures. I'm not having now the names on my head, but there's some stories there, and I feel like that, even if it's fiction, called to that a lot, and that was huge for me to read.
I never connected it from the 80s point of view, but I definitely connected it from a political point of view, and that's why I said,
Mhm.
the genre is like sci-fi political. But yeah, it's so interesting because especially when you come from a perspective of like, even if you just talk about pride, right? Like a big event where like maybe some bi people feel like, oh, well, am I really part of the community? Like I'm with this guy, like, oh, I'm not out, or like I feel like I'm part of the community, but not really. So I think even in that small tidbit, it's like it kind of says that too. But yeah, I'm really happy with that story. The coloring, the art is so good. It's
Yes.
short, but it really says so much in that story. And yeah, I love the metaphor. When I first read that, I was like, oh, it's a metaphor. That's really, really cool. Like you have to think about it a little bit. And I love stories like that. So yeah, it was really, I think it has a lot to say.
Yes. And also the other highlight that I had is Gay Panic. That story, I think that was really, really fun to read, even if it was like filled with bigotry. Like the whole story
Yeah.
has a bunch of bullshit, but it's really, really fun to read, and I really appreciate that. It similarly to the last one, the by card, those two had like some real bullshit that really happens in real life, done in like very ridiculous and absurdist way, like this kind of humor, and I really, really like that.
It was just unique. I think the PSA, the Gay Panic. That one, that was like one of the first ones I read. I'm like, oh, this has to be in it because it's just like so fun. I've never seen a comic like this with that's just a PSA about like don't be a dick, and it's just so fun. And then yeah, Bicard. I mean, it's one of my favorites. I don't, everything's one of my favorites for different reasons, but that one was just so unique. I was like, oh, so you're actually using like a physical bicard and it's like a spy adventure. And I'm like, man, this is so much fun and so different. Because honestly, when I did this anthology, I was really expecting a lot of slice of life. And I was kind of worried about it. Because I'm like, man, how much slice of life can you read in one book? Like, I want like different genres. I really want this to be fun and like show bisexuality in different forms. And I think like the PSA and Bicard did such a good job at that because they're so, they say something about bisexuality, but not overtly saying, oh, this is my experience with bisexuality. It just says it in a different lens. And You know what's interesting about the gay panic, and what something I really tried opening with this anthology is that yes, I really wanted a lot of bisexual creators on this, but I actually said anyone could enter, because I really didn't want to gatekeep at all, because somebody might not be out yet, right? They probably want to write this story for a reason, and they're like, okay, they might not feel bi right now, but maybe later on this is a story they'll end up helping them. That's one. But B, two our creators actually have spouses that are part of the bisexual community, so they see it from a different angle. And I was like, oh, that's really cool, because they're, they may not be part of the community, but they're such an ally. I'm like, that's a really, and those are, two of the best stories that we have, which is Gay Panic and LGBTQ RPG. Those are just two people that had spouses that are part of the community, and they told really good stories from a different angle. So that's something I really wanted to do, and something I'll continue to do, is that really try to keep the anthology open for everybody. Obviously, I want bisexual voices as well. That's definitely the
Hmm.
point. But to get
Yeah.
different perspectives about bisexuality from different people, and we could get some really good stories there.
Yeah, that's amazing. We got another comment by Gabriel about yeah, this is about my voice, I think. Yes. Uh, the concept, Gabriel says, the concept of how there is a power and a responsibility. There is a power and a responsibility in all kinds of voices. Acknowledging that passing doesn't discount that voice.
100%.
That's big part of the story. Yeah, I think it's a good sum up.
Yeah, I would love to tell more stories about that. I think we touched upon it a little bit through
Hmm.
my voice. We touched upon it with Punchline. That was a big story
Yes.
about like bi-erasure. We even touched upon it in my story, but I think there's even more to say about like feeling like you're not part of the community because you're passing. Like,
Hmm.
is that is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think that's a part of it. Like, it's in a way it protects you because you're passing, right? Because you're not like maybe you're not being thrown bigoted comments as often, but at the same time you feel like you're not part of the community. So there's like this really uh you know balancing act that you have to play with that, like, is it a detriment to pass? And I think that's still a conversation within, for gay people talking about bisexual people, and bisexual people talking about themselves. It's still such a big comment of like, okay, well, how do we deal with this? How do I feel like I'm part of the community, but also see your privilege of passing? Is passing a privilege? Stuff like that. So it's like obviously this really, really bigger conversation that I hope we could tell even more stories about, because I think it's so complex.
Yeah, and I think there's layers to it because like you can also like it's not the same experience, but you can also be like understood as gay or lesbian, and there's also an experience different, even if that's not your reality, because like that's also a different experience, and it's not as often called passing. So that's that. I don't know that. I think you are right that there's a lot of stories to tell in that way, and I think those two were really great in that. And we got another comment from Gabriel. Uh, Says Punchline really held concepts that so many people I know need more stories like that. They get so much aim at them that are aimed to invalidate them, and the resurgence of the final page is really sweet. So
Yeah.
yeah, the
What's
final
funny
page
about
is really great.
it's such a what's funny about that story is actually Kay had submitted as just an artist. They because every story I wanted people to write like a little bio of who they are and why they wanted to do this. Because again, if you weren't bi, I wanted to understand why you wanted to tell this story. So Kay is bi, obviously, but that's the reason why I did that. Kay wrote this beautiful, beautiful like letter to me and talked about their experiences, and I was like, oh, you should make this a story, and like you should draw it and like make your story. Like, are you cool with that? And she was like, yeah, I would love to do that. So originally she wasn't even going to write a story. She just applied as an artist. I was like, no, 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 make this a full story, which was really cool that it ended up coming out that way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, oh, okay. Yeah, there's another one I wanna like talk a little bit to you about, especially talking about that volume two. There's one story in this first volume that deals with polyamory, and I feel like with that story, I don't want to spoil things for people because the anthology is not out yet. But like, I feel like there were more things to explore. Like I would have loved even like maybe other stories about polyamory, or maybe that same story like expand on it. Because like I felt like the story was told from the point of view of one character, and the point of view of the other two characters was like pretty obscure for most of it, at least of one of them. I don't want to spoil a thing too much, but like there's one character that I don't really see as much point of view from, and I feel like I would, I don't know, I would love if for volume two, or for something like that, to feel to really explore everyone's feelings. Because like, yeah, I'm polyamorous, so just like I was really like really, I guess, extra critical with the story. Maybe other person that is their first introduction to the concepts is more like, oh, okay, this is interesting. But for me, it was like, I want more. I want you to explain me why these people feel exactly this way for this to end like that.
For sure. Like I said, I think there's concepts here that we just scratched the surface on.
Yeah.
I'm proud we were able to have a polyamorous story here because
Yes.
obviously it's a experience, and also could be part of bisexuality. So yeah, and I agree. One thing of editing wise, one thing I really tried pushing as much as I could was like, we really need the partner's voice. We really need to understand, like, okay, they're kind of part of this as well, and accepting, because there was, I think, they originally, the first draft, we really didn't get his voice as much. I'm like, no, we need to make sure, like, let's get his voice a little bit more. And then obviously also the other person that comes into the story. I would love to have more voices, because of the page count. It really was from one person's perspective,
Um,
but I agree. I think we need more stories like that, and more, understanding, and stories about polyamory in general. So yeah, I would love that. I think this just scratched the surface and told one experience, but I think there's more, so much. You could probably make a whole
yes,
anthology about it, right? There's a whole separate anthology
totally.
about it. But yeah, I think there's definitely more to tell. I very much agree.
And I forgot to say the positive thing that was that I feel like that story really did something really well, which is like there's like kind of an stigma around bisexuality and polyamory, and it really like broke some of it. Like it really, like it did so in a way that wasn't like really feeding into like stigma, which I feel like it's really difficult to put in only one story in Anthology. Like
For
it's a
sure.
lot in one shoulder.
Yeah, that was something that was really important as an editor. I'm not polyamorous, but just, trying to figure out that, like, okay, how do I, take away from any stigmas that are in the bisexual community about it, and just tell a really good story, and hopefully a representative story about polyamory. So that was probably one of the harder stories to balance and like edit, but I think it came out really good, and our creative team did such a good job with it. And yeah, like I said, I love to see more stories with it and expand more on that.
And it's visually gorgeous. Like for people that are listening or watching this, it's visually amazing. Like it goes in through the eyes, but that's most on the Anthology.
Yeah, we tried our very hardest to find just awesome artists. That's something we really want, and obviously awesome writers and awesome everything. But we really want this to be such visually appealing. Like, you would get this from Marvel or DC. We really wanted the art styles to be good, and I think every story has some great art, and again, different art. And I think everyone could find their favorite.
Okay, so mm, I'm trying to think of the stories that we haven't really talked about a lot. There's the Big Little Things, which is great, but it's like really short. I think it's 3 pages.
Yeah, it's like a it's, I think, our shortest story, and which fits the title, Big Little Things. It's
Yeah.
exactly that. It shows a different type of coming out story, which I liked. I liked it was like this really, like, I think I put it more towards the end or middle because of that. It's just like, okay, some coming out stories is not a big deal at all, or it's, to a person that you're not, you just gotta come out to everybody. Sometimes it's not the most emotional thing. It's like, oh, I'm bi. It's like, cool, you're not my best friend, but I'm glad you know. So yeah, but that was, yeah, a two-page story, but I think told a lot in the space it has.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like it too. For for people that are watching, like wondering about this, I will get to this in a moment because I'm not making the question in my head yet. But let's talk about the possibility of a volume two. You already told me what you want to be more voices of. There's something that you want to do apart from the more voices different, or there's something you want to do more stories. You want to do I don't know. There's
I I think it depends on the submissions, right? Like if we have so many great submissions, maybe I'll expand it. But I feel like this was kind of a sweet spot,
oh,
because yeah, I like that it was just kind of like 40 something pages. When you get to like the 90-page anthologies, it becomes a little bit of a chore to read. You're like, okay, I get it. Especially if you're reading it all in like one sitting. I felt like this was a good sweet spot, was 40 something pages. But yeah, if we could do more, that'd be awesome. It all depends on the submissions for sure on that one. Which we're going to open up submissions in the next couple of months. We have our Slice of Life Kickstarter coming up soon, so we got to like focus on that and the webtoon. But after that, we're gonna have like a little break during like the holiday time, and that's when we're gonna probably open up submissions and like get going with a volume two, because this did really well, and we want to tell more stories, and we want to do it as quickly and efficiently as possible. So that's in our timeline. Makes the most sense. Is in 3 or 4 months we'll be opening up submissions again.
I make sure to put it somewhere in the article that you're gonna open submissions soon, so you hopefully get some of those.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Now, thank you for like coming to talk about this. I'm really excited, but I don't know what is to ask you.
Well, I'm here. I'm an open book. Yeah, no, it's just a book I'm so proud of. I am so freaking proud of this book, and I'm so glad that people have like, supported it, and people seem interested, and people have read it. Obviously, it's not many yet because it's really just been, journalists that have read it and a couple of pros. But everyone that's read it seems to really like it. We had Monkey Fighting Robots gave it 5 stars all around, so that was really cool.
Oh,
Yeah, so it seems like people are just connecting, and that's what's really important. We worked really hard on it, and I'm glad people are liking it. And I want this second volume to be even better. I want, now we have a bar. We got to go over that bar. So
yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. That is like a really sweet read in like it. For me, it reads really, really fast, but I guess I'm used to like being a comics journalist makes you used to reading a lot of comics in very few time. so,
yeah, one
so this
sitting
was
most of the time.
yeah. I usually read like 200 pages in like very few times. So this was really easy for me. Like as I think I have talked with someone over at Comic Watch about how it was like a really light read for me, like was really fast, and they were like, "Nah, it's fine. It's not really light or fast." And I think that's on me maybe.
Hey, I'm glad that you get to. I also do comic book criticism, so it's like I'll read like 12 to 15 books in one day in like one sitting. So I'm like, sometimes when you get to that 15th book, you're like, okay. So yeah, but I understand that point of view for sure. I think it's personal preference for me. I'm like, I rather shorter stories than longer
Hmm.
stories, but I definitely see the necessity of longer stories.
Yeah, but I think you're right that even if you're tired, you're gonna love to read this because it's very like, yeah, it passes really easy. Like once you get a hold on it, it's really like story after story.
Which makes it feel more like a book than a short story collection. I think that's why I like you said earlier, it's like, oh, it feels like a book. It's like, yeah, that's definitely what
Yeah,
we want to do. We want to make it feel like it's one thing, not just like, oh, that short story was good, but didn't really like that short story because it was so different from the other stuff. Like I really didn't want that because that's what every other anthology feels like.
okay, so we got one question in the comments from Gabriel. Thank you, Gabriel, for doing questions what I think of mine. And it's what kind of representation do you want to make its way into mainstream comics? Mainstream comics.
Oh man, so much, man. I want the real bisexual experience. I still don't feel like that's really happened
Now,
at all in comics. I think, Constantine, obviously a very popular bisexual character. I don't read Constantine, so I can't tell you if it's like a great bisexual experience representation, but
I'm,
I'm
I'm
sure it is.
reading
He has.
through Constantine right now, and it's
Is it
great, but
good?
here and there, it's great, but it has its moments. It's great
Okay.
sometimes, and okay others. It's like,
Because that's the only time I
but
can
yeah,
think of like a big time
yeah,
like bisexual character. Again, like you have Nico, but I don't even think Nico's even said she's bisexual in the book in Runaways, and I love Nico to death, but I don't think she has. Julie has at least said she's bi, but it's not really. Besides that one book in Avengers Academy, she didn't really talk about it that much. Um, so yeah, I want to see more of that. Something I'm really doing in my other projects, like Twilight Daughter's superhero book. One of the supporting characters is bi, and in the upcoming issue, the whole issue is about her being bi and like her feelings towards it. And then one of the important things we want to do with the webtoon slice of life is really show real queer experiences. And right now we are focusing on a character that's coming out as a lesbian, but we do have a character that's pansexual. That's going to be a big thing, and we're going to have a big story about that as well. So at least in my stories, that's something I really want to do and show real experiences and show real stories, and hopefully we get to see that more in others. I mean, we have Tim Drake. I'm really, really excited to see where that can go. I personally really like the story they did with Tim. I think they showcased the bisexual experience as much as they could in those few pages, and I'm hoping these future stories actually like show like, okay, this is a person who thought they were straight, found out they're bi. What's that experience like? A male character as well. I'm so happy with that story. They never erased his relationship with Stephanie. Just like, no, I really feel this way about this person. I really want to explore that. I never felt like I knew myself. Now I'm trying to, see what that's about. So I think Tim, for me, was really good, and I hope it continues to be good.
yeah. I agree with you that that we need like more variety, like more broad scope. Because right now we have like a few characters, and either you want it or you don't want it. That put put things into like stereotypes, and like it's inevitable if you have very few stories, because if you have very few stories, even if the writing is very good, the reader is gonna put some of their baggage into it. If you have a lot of stories, it's more difficult that you don't see really that these are different people that have different experiences.
I agree, because I feel like the bisexual experience lives on the internet right now, right? It's just like more of like we know all the bisexual like cliches or like whatever, or just like I wouldn't say cliches, but bisexual callbacks, like right,
Yeah,
like oh that's part of the bisexual community, more because of the internet, more because like we're connecting with each other, but not because of media. Like I think for maybe other stuff we're getting a little bit more from media. I mean like oh that's my story, that's really cool, but yeah, bisexuality, I still don't really see that's true. Maybe again, sex education, Adam's character, they did a pretty good job with it. But that's like one out of how many other stories we can have.
yeah, totally. So maybe I want to ask you like, if you what do you want people to take of the book? Like, I didn't ask you that. It's a really broad question, but I think it's a good one for like, yeah, closing a bit on the theme, and maybe tell
Whoa.
me things that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, things I want people to take away is just to learn more about bisexuality. Learn that's really intricate, the experience. It's different for everybody.
Yeah,
And it's not the same as being straight. It's not the same as being gay. It's its own experience. And that's something I really wanted to showcase. And I hope people take away. And again, maybe people could learn about themselves a little bit more. Either if they're bi, be like, oh, I experienced that. I don't feel alone, or if they're not bi or they haven't come out yet, just learn like, oh, this is my experience. That's really cool. Um, Things we haven't talked about. I feel like you really scratched. Honestly, you did such a good job. This was so good. I love, a lot of times when you do interviews, it's just like it's not as in depth. So it's just like, oh yeah, you could go check out the $5 bundle. So having such an in depth conversation about something that's so important to me means the world, and I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And it was just such a great interview. So thank you.
thank you. I'm really really glad that you enjoy it too, because I really really love reading this, and I was like, I really need to talk with her. I was like waiting in case somebody else told me I really, really need to, and Gabriel told me, but we couldn't make schedules work.
Mm.
But, but yeah, but this was great, and thank you so so much for coming. And people that will watch this or are watching this, this is on Kickstarter. An article is gonna come up on Saturday at Comic Watch, and we will put the interview there. And yeah, support the book. And there's like a lot of tires different with, it's very very affordable and very a lot of options. So yeah, and I'm so excited for volume 2 already. Like
Thank you. Me too.
I I knew one of my big questions of the like, I put some questions together, and one was, will it be on volume 2? Because I was like, we need it. like
I
like it
agree.
better be. And you were like, yeah, of course. And I was like, okay.
Yeah,
But yeah.
I'm so happy there's gonna be a volume 2 as well. It just showed that because this did so well, we can make a volume 2. So it really is because of everyone that supported the book. And yeah, something I really, going back to the affordability, that's something I really want to do for this book, and I do for all books, is that I really like, especially the digital book. It doesn't cost us anything to make that. So it's just like I could make that $5 and someone can read it. And the same thing, like, oh, let's say you can't support the book, you can't give $5. There's $1 where you get 17 other queer books. So I
Yes.
always try to make everything as affordable as possible.
Yeah, and some of those books are really great. I thought I saw Is Nana by Greg Helise there,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, wow, I love his work, so that was great.
Yeah, no, we have so many cool people. We have like Pat Chand, who gave
Yeah.
a book. We got Glitter Viper. We got so much.
Yeah, check it out, people. It's in the link in the video. It's gonna be in the link in the article. And thank you again for Ria.
Of course.